Thank you for joining us today at the LDRS Creative YouTube tutorial channel, where we hope to inspire.
Welcome to Hedgehog Hollow. Today I'm really excited to be starting my term on the Little Darlings rubber stamp design team, and I'm actually going to be showing you 3 projects. So we're going to actually be using one of the Bible verse or art journaling stamps to create some bookmarks. So the first one I've left quite plain, and we're just going to add colour using coloured embossing powders as well as some Nouveau jewel drops. The next one we're going to be using are Zig art markers, just a few select colours and some distress ink shading, plus some more of the lovely Nouveau drops. And then finally I'm going to be using a craft cardstock, and I'm going to show you how to use your Chameleon pencils to really make them pop. So 3 very different projects, but you can make them all at once to save lots of time and lots of techniques in it. So let's get started.
So the stamp set we're using today has 2 stamps in, and they're actually designed for Bible journaling and art journaling, but we're going to create 3 unique bookmarks with them. The first one I'm going to use some Neenah Desert Storm. We'll also be using some Neenah Solar White today as well. Now this one I'm using my Tim Holtz platform there and my embossing powder. I'm using VersaMark ink, and I'm going to be using Ranger Superfine White embossing powder. I love the Ranger Superfine. I think it works really well. I'm also going to link up those tidy trays you see me using there. They're so handy to have. You can use them for glitter, for sequins, for embossing powder, and they've got that lovely funnel on the end that helps you just tuck it all back into the pot afterwards. So I'm just heating this up here with my Wagner heat tool. This is one of my favorite ones, and I like to work systematically from top to bottom to make sure I've covered all of the areas. Now you'll find with that superfine embossing powder, you'll get a great image even on that small text, and it'll be nice and clear, which is why I have my basic colours, and you'll find I use those a lot. Now in colouring in using the Chameleon pencils, they're all double-ended if you haven't seen them before, and they shade perfectly from the lightest tone on that pencil all the way through to the dark one, depending on how much pressure you use. They also come in that lovely case you saw me using there, and also along the bottom you can just see in that top right hand corner how it shows you the light and the dark and the blends in the middle of each of the pencils. So it really depends on how much pressure you use as to what colour comes out of the pencil. I really do like them. I have Prismacolors as well, but I find I reach for these far more often. Now I'm also using the red there on the berries, maybe a little bit festive, but I just love how that red will pop out. So I'm going back in just in the bottom of each leaf in that V near the branch. I'm adding a little bit of that darker tone, and when you see the close-up shots that we took at the end, they blend perfectly. Now I'm just going to leave them like this, and I think they look great. You can also use Gamsol with these pencils. They work absolutely fine and really nicely. Again, I'm using that brown pencil, the lights and the darks, to fill in my leaf, and I really love how well they pop on this crafty neutral coloured cardstock as well. So again, just going back in with those darker shades just to add that little bit of texture in there. I also grabbed my black pencil to fill in the gaps in the lettering. I really wanted that to pop against the background, and I just filled in some of those as well, but you'll see all of that in the close-up photography at the end of the video. So I'm going to stamp out all of the bookmarks and colour them in, and then we'll work on assembling them and adding those final touches. I also grabbed that green pencil and just went round that piece on the top, used my finger to wipe it off. You'll also see later at some points I use baby wipes to wipe off some of the embossing powder with the coloured pencils and with some of the pens I use, and that works really well too. So for this one I've used the other stamp in the set, and I embossed it VersaMark and Superfine black embossing powder from Ranger, and I'm using my Zig clean colour pens to colour in. I'll link up all of the colours I used in the blog post, and I'll also link up some great options for sets if you're interested in experimenting with them. They're a really lovely pen to work with. They have a brush tip like a paintbrush, so they're not a solid brush like a Copic or a Spectrum Noir. They have actual bristles in them, and they're really lovely to work with. You can add water and work with them that way, but here I'm just colouring in with a few different tones. in exactly the same way. So this one I wanted it to be a little bit more animated and flat rather than all the tones that I added in the previous one. Just again a different idea. And these bookmarks I've made for Maddie, and I'm going to send her into school with them for some of her reading buddies. She's a very keen reader and I'm sure she'll love sharing these bookmarks out. So I made them with a school thing in mind. You could of course laminate them if you wanted to, but because I add some of the Nouveau drops and things later, I'm just going to leave them like this and hope that in 5th grade they're going to be able to look after them and they'll be able to use them for their accelerated reader program. So here you can see I'm alternating between the letters and I'm just filling them in. Again, I've used quite a simple palette and I'll link all those colours up in the blog post, which will be in the description below the video, with supply lists and lots of pictures, and all the pictures you see throughout this will also be in that blog post for you as well. Now I'm going back, and this time I'm being really heavy with the embossing buddy or powder tool, depending what you have. I wanted to go quite heavy. Now I learned that through trial and error with these, and I'm using some coloured embossing powders, and there's a few lessons I learned along the way which I will share with you as well. So this again is some Neenah Solar White. I'm going to ink it up with the VersaMark and stamp it out so that we can do that rainbow coloured embossing powder. Now the rainbow coloured embossing powder I found was super static and sticky and almost left a bit of dye on my paper, hence why I was really quite heavy-handed with that embossing tool, and I would recommend you are as well if you try out this technique. But it does come out really effective. I'm using, they are also from Ranger embossing powders. They're not super fine, but they do still come out great, and you'll see that later when I do some close-up shots for you. So I'm going to start with the blue at the top end, and I picked out an area to emboss with that blue, and you can see there just putting it on those areas and off the edge of the paper there. Now just be careful and make sure you empty your tidy tray out between colours. You can imagine how I learnt that out. A couple of those colours are a little bit more empty purely because I made that mistake. Then I'm doing the yellow, and then I can fill in the green at the end. Now next time I don't think I'd use the yellow. I think I'd actually go with the pink. The yellow is quite insipid. I think it would look great on a darker cardstock, but I don't think it pops quite as well on the white. But that was a lesson that I learnt along the way. There you can see I'm doing the green piece. Now you could work in exactly the same way. You need to work quite quickly for the VersaMark to stay wet, but you could add as many colours as you like. Just work in sections, work from the top and then add your blue, then you could add your green section, and if you wanted to maybe put a pink or purple in the middle, you could do that too. The other thing I found with the coloured embossing powders is when I'm heating them, you can see there with the Wagner heat tool, it's not that easy to work out when they're cooked and when to stop heating. So I decided to just go backwards and forwards, and maybe I went a little bit longer than I needed to, but I was better doing that than having areas that of course hadn't melted and formed the enamel. So a little bit tricky to work with. Definitely I need a little bit more patience. Do work quickly with them, and as I say, be really heavy-handed on your powder tool. You won't regret that one. So but I think it looks great, and as I say, I wouldn't use the yellow next time. I'd probably go with a pink just because it would pop a little bit more, but still it looks so pretty. So I'm now going to be using my barber's brushes. I've pre-cut my background coloured cardstock, and I'm using a Teflon mat there with some distress ink. So I'm going to use some yellows on the yellow, I'm going to use green on the green, and I'm actually going to use blue on the others as well. So this one I'm using mostly Salty Ocean, and I did choose a little bit of the tumbled glass rather, but I just felt it needed to be a little bit hard, deeper in colour and a bit harder, so I went in with that Salty Ocean. Now you'll see in a second, once I've done that, I still feel it looks a little bit flat, so I'm going to grab my distress ink sprayer. And right there you can see I'm cleaning off the embossing powder as I talked to you earlier, just with a baby wipe, and it just wipes straight off the top. But I'm taking my distress sprayer and I'm flicking some water that I've put into my hand with the sprayer, and creates the most wonderful effect of watermarks. Really advise it. If you have a background and you think it looks a little bit flat, then do check that out. Now that's my Ranger heat tool that I am drying it with. That's a little bit different to an embossing heat tool, and it's really good to use over the top of embossing powder if you then add water and things. I'll link in the top corner the video that I did comparing a heat tool to that Ranger heat tool so you can see the difference. So I'm wiping off my Teflon mat and turning it over because I want to switch to a different colour and I don't want it to transfer. And for this one I'm using the yellow, so I really didn't want it to transfer either. All of these colours and things will be linked below the video for you, so don't worry about having to note them down. Everything's there, and in the blog post everything sits there for you just so that you can refer back to it. So the pieces I actually cut 1/2 inch bigger than the base tags. So each one I came out to a slightly different size because I just trimmed around it using my cutter. And I then just added 1/2 inch to the length and to the width, so there's 1/4 inch all the way around. So I'm taking the green there and I'm flicking it around. Now that adds a nice depth to the edge, and it also adds ink in sort of some random places. So when I take the barber's brush with a little bit more ink, it pulls those droplets out in a little bit more of a random pattern, and you get some softs and some lights. It gives you a really pretty effect. So do play around with these things. I use barber's brushes rather than the clarity brushes or a Ranger blending tool. Again, I'll link that up for you too. Now this is my We Are Memory Keeper Stitch Happy machine. So pretty in the pink there, and I've never used it before, but I was impressed how well it went through the paper. I tried a long straight stitch, which I did on this one. On the next one you'll see that I do a shorter straight stitch, and then I try out the zigzag stitch. There's also a scallop stitch and a buttonhole stitch on this machine, and there's that guide there as well that you can use. I needed to go a little bit closer to the edge than that guide would allow me, but there were lots of reference points on the machine that I could use. It gave me a really strong, nicely stitched edge, better than buying lots of dies in every single size. And of course you can manipulate it in any way you'd like, and you can do circles and hearts and all sorts of fun things on there as well. I will be doing a separate video on this, so check out the Hedgehog Hollow channel, which you'll see linked at the end of the video if you want to know more about this machine. But it goes through paper, it goes through I think thin chipboard from what I've read, goes through fabric, and it's just really pretty. It comes in some lovely colours as well, and I do love the We Are Memory Keepers tools. They look great and they have a practical purpose. So I'm going to start layering these bookmarks up. I like using the Tonic Funky Tape Runner. It's very inexpensive and very strong. My runner actually ran out halfway through there, so you'll see that I cut the shot, and I kept my machine there just in case once I'd layered everything up like that I needed to add that extra row of stitching so that it showed around the edge. So I'm going to layer each one up onto its respective colour there, and they're all Lawn Fawn coloured cardstocks that I've used, and again I'll link those up for you. Now, as it always goes, I couldn't find the correct hole punch for the ribbon I wanted to use, so I ended up using a 1/8. I think I really needed a 1/4 or even a ribbon slip, but I couldn't find that, so I ended up punching out my 1/8 3 times over to create a bigger hole. I'll link up the one I was actually looking for at the end of the video in the supply list rather for you. So I'm using some burlap ribbon to give it that nice natural effect. The one thing I found was you want to cut the burlap ribbon straight and then sort of curl it up to go through, and then pull it through and then cut your tapered ends, and that seemed to work really well. If you had a bigger hole, that would be much easier, but as I say, I just couldn't find the right size, which is always the way when you need it for a particular project. I'm sure next week it will appear somewhere, and I'd have thought that was a very sensible place in the beginning. So I'm putting them through all of my tags here, and then we can go through and add our finishing touches. I do everything on one of these Ranger craft mats, and I will again link those up for you. I cut them down to fit in my Misties, in my Tim Holtz stamp platform, so I cut them down to all sorts of sizes so that they fit my workspace or whatever project I happen to be doing. I do keep a large one rolled up in the drawer for larger projects, but I do find having them in these smaller sizes is very handy to just grab them as and when they are needed. So if you've never watched the Hedgehog Hollow videos before, you'll find, as I've mentioned numerous times in this video, your supply lists are below. We also have all the photography and things for you linked up on the blogs. You're welcome to pin it and share it. We love for you to share with your friends and to reference back to the Hollow if you do share. So here I'm now adding some Nouveau jewel drops. I love how on this blue one that's quite plain, it really adds that pop of green colour to the leaves. Yet when I go over the green Chameleon pencils, it just enhances that green. It doesn't overpower it, it doesn't change the colour, and we do have some really nice close-up shots for you to have a look at how they work, and I'll take you through those in just a second. So I'm going to add these drops all over these leaves on this particular one. On the Create and Share in the right, on the black background, I just added it on the 2 leaves at the top, and on this one I'm just picking out the leaves that are not sort of linked to the tree, as it were, the ones that were sort of out on their own. I add it to those. Now this tag, I kept looking at it on my desk and I think it needed something a little bit more. So I decided to try the yellow Chameleon pencil onto the yellow writing just to try and make it pop out a little bit more. And I do something in just a second to make it pop even more. I also decided to add the brown in the tree trunk as well. You can see here I'm trying out a few different colours just to give it that little bit more interest that I think it also needed. So you can follow me colouring along here. As I say, these pencils are great. They're a bit like a Prisma pencil. I think they're much better value for money if you've ever seen them or used them before. You can blend them with Gamsol and you can get quite a different tone out of them depending on the pressure you use and which end you use. They're all double-ended with a light and a dark shade. So there you can see my nice tree trunk. Again, I'm grabbing a baby wipe and I'm just cleaning off that embossing powder with the brown, anywhere the brown pencil has touched, to make it pop a little bit more. I also go over the blue writing with the blue pencil just to firm it up a bit, and I think it really does make quite a difference when you see the finished tag. I was glad I went back in and did that, and I often find a project will sit on my desk and I click go on the camera and we try and add an extra detail to it. It's one of those things I think sometimes you have to work in stages and find out what works. So I've gone back into the bottom there and I've actually grabbed the green pencil and I'm going to go around that writing again, and I also go around the edge slightly just to really make it pop from the background, and I think that makes a big difference to the end of that tag. And by the time I finish with this part of it, I'm really happy with it, and I love that yellow background, and I also love the verses that are on these tags as well. Now, next up, I have for you lots of photography we've taken. As I say, all of these will be available on the blog post. There's the 3 tags together, and let's have a look at each one. So this is the green, and I have to say this one is my favorite. This is a closer look at the leaves there, and then you can see that depth in the different greens and how those Nouveau drops just enhance that as well. This is how the one on the yellow finished up. I love the tones again that we have in that blue. And we have some great photos there, and I love how light green that pops. You can see there how the Nouveau drops look and how great those droplets of water end up adding that interest. Here's the yellow tag with the zig markers, and again you can see how those Nouveau drops enhance just that green. They didn't really alter it. So thanks so much for stopping by for my first pose here at LDRS. Please do click those subscribe buttons that are on your screen right now. We also have a couple of recommended videos for you, and I hope you'll join me again very soon. Have a great day. Happy stamping. Bye.